So if your nonprofit is thinking about fundraising in the beautiful Aloha state, you're going to want to know their specific rules. Today, let's break down exactly what Hawaii requires for charitable solicitation registration.
All right, this explainer is part of our ongoing series on multi-state fundraising compliance, where we try to make these, well, let's be honest, kind of complex topics a lot easier to understand. This resource is brought to you by Ironwood Registrations, and they specialize in helping nonprofits navigate these exact kinds of rules every single day.
Okay, let's kick things off with a really common point of confusion. A lot of nonprofits get their federal 501c3 status from the IRS and, well, they think they're done. But here's the thing that's so often overlooked. States like Hawaii have their own, totally separate set of rules just for fundraising. Getting that federal status, that's really just step one.
And that brings us right to the big question, right? If your organization asks for donations from anyone in Hawaii, do you actually need to register with the state before you even start? Let's dive in and find out.
So, we've broken this down into 5 key parts to make it super clear. We'll start with who has to register, then walk through the initial process and the annual reporting you'll need to do. After that, we'll cover common exemptions, and we'll wrap it all up with a simple checklist to help you stay compliant.
All right, first up, who actually needs to register? Well, in Hawaii, all of this is regulated by the Department of the Attorney General. They're the ones keeping an eye on charitable fundraising to make sure everything is transparent for the public.
So, the rule of thumb here is pretty straightforward. You have to register before you start soliciting if you meet any of these criteria. If you're based in Hawaii and you ask for donations, that's a trigger. If you ask for contributions from Hawaii residents, even if you're based somewhere else, that's a trigger. And, you guessed it, using professional fundraisers or other third parties in Hawaii, that also triggers the requirement.
And let's be super clear on this next point, because this is a big one that trips up a lot of organizations. Where you are physically located just doesn't matter. So if your nonprofit is based in, I don't know, California, but you're sending out emails, making phone calls, or even just have a Donate Now button on your website that people in Hawaii can see and use, yep, you're considered to be soliciting there and you have to register.
Okay, so you figured out you need to register. What does that initial process actually look like? What are the steps? Well, the good news is Hawaii has made this pretty simple. It's all handled through their online filing system. You just go in, enter your organization's info, and then, depending on your situation, you'll upload a few required documents. It's a really straightforward digital process, which is nice.
And here is a really pleasant surprise, something you don't see every day: the cost. Believe it or not, Hawaii is one of the very few states that has no initial registration fee. That's right, getting set up costs you $0 in state fees.
Now here's another thing that makes Hawaii a little different. It's not an annual renewal. Once you're registered, you're basically registered forever, unless you decide to formally withdraw. So the key to staying compliant isn't about renewing each year, it's all about filing an annual report, which we're going to talk about right now.
Which brings us to probably the most critical part of staying compliant in Hawaii: that annual financial report. You know, this is the main way the state keeps your information up to date and makes sure there's transparency for the public.
So let's talk deadlines. Your annual report is due 4.5 months after your fiscal year ends. So for most of you, if your fiscal year ends on December 31st, that means your report is due May 15th. And here's a really helpful tip. If you file for a federal extension with the IRS, Hawaii gives you an automatic 6-month extension too. That's a huge help.
So what do you actually have to file? Well, typically, you're going to submit a copy of your IRS Form 990 or your 990EZ. Now, depending on your revenue, you might need a few other financial documents. And unlike that free initial registration, there is an annual filing fee. And it's based on a sliding scale that's tied to your organization's revenue.
Of course, not every single organization has to go through this whole process. So let's talk about the most common exemptions you'll find in Hawaii.
Okay, the biggest and most common exemption is for smaller organizations. If your nonprofit typically brings in less than $25,000 in contributions each year, and you don't use professional fundraisers, then you'll most likely qualify for an exemption.
And beyond that $25,000 threshold, there are also certain types of organizations that might be exempt. We're talking about religious organizations, accredited schools and colleges, membership groups that only solicit from their own members, nonprofit hospitals, and government entities.
Okay, now listen up, because this is a critically important detail. In Hawaii, an exemption is not automatic. You can't just assume you're exempt and then do nothing. You actually have to go online and proactively file for that exemption to prove you're eligible. This is a step you absolutely cannot skip.
All right, to wrap things up, let's pull this all together into a quick little checklist. This is what you need to do to maintain your compliance and stay in good standing with the state.
So, to stay compliant, you just need to keep 4 things on your radar. First, always track that annual report deadline. Second, keep an eye on your fundraising activities. If they change, your status might too. Third, every so often, just double-check if you're still eligible for an exemption. And finally, try to stay aware of any regulatory updates coming out of the state.
So when you step back, what's the whole point of all this? Really, it just comes down to one word: transparency. These rules are all designed to give the public confidence that the organizations they're donating to are legitimate and accountable.
So, look, if you only remember one thing from this whole explainer, please let it be this. In Hawaii, compliance is all about the annual report. It's not a renewal. Staying on top of that yearly financial filing, that is the absolute key to keeping your registration active and in good standing.
As fundraising goes more and more national, trying to manage all these different requirements across dozens of states, it can get really complex really fast. So does your organization have a clear process for handling all this?
If you find that you need a hand managing your charitable solicitation registrations, whether it's in Hawaii or anywhere else, the team over at Ironwood Registrations, this is exactly what they do. You can learn more or get some help at ironwoodregistrations.com. Thanks so much for watching.